The grand lobby of the Starlight Royale Hotel gleamed like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light off polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. It was a Monday morning, and the hotel was buzzing with activity. Bellhops rushing luggage, guests chattering over coffee, and receptionists handling check-ins with practiced smiles. And then Ozzy Osbourne walked in. Not with security, not with flashing cameras, not with a crowd trailing him, just a man in worn jeans, an old leather jacket, and slightly scuffed boots. His hair was messy, his face calm, and his presence unassuming. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfectly pressed uniform and a clipboard clutched to her chest, immediately frowned. "Sir, the staff entrance is on the side," she said, her voice sharp but polite. A few guests nearby turned to glance, smirking. "Oh, he thinks he belongs here," whispered one woman in a designer coat to her friend, barely holding back her laugh. "Maybe he's lost," said a man, sipping his latte, shaking his head. Ozzy didn't say a word. He smiled faintly, a small curve that didn't need approval or acknowledgement. He simply walked closer to the counter, unclasped his jacket, and rested his hands calmly on the marble surface. The receptionist glanced at him again, now slightly irritated. "Sir, as I said, this is for paying guests. Staff entrance is—" Before she could finish, the guests around her had begun to chuckle openly. Some even pulled out their phones, recording. It wasn't just mockery, it was the kind that makes people forget about decency for a few seconds. Ozzy looked around, eyes sweeping over the opulent surroundings, and yet he gave no reaction. He seemed almost invisible in a place designed to spotlight wealth and status. Minutes passed. The air grew heavier with tension and anticipation. Guests began whispering, wondering if he'd even leave or cause a scene. Little did anyone know, this unassuming man, the one they had silently mocked, was about to turn the tables in a way no one would ever forget. The luxury, the laughter, the arrogance. It was all about to meet its match, quietly, deliberately, and with a touch of silent power. And as the doors of the lobby opened again, a wave of panic would sweep through, leaving everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about appearances, respect, and power. The lobby of the Starlight Royale Hotel had never seen a Monday quite like this one. The regular hum of activity, the tapping of heels on marble floors, the soft murmur of guests arranging breakfast, and the polite bell chimes, was suddenly punctuated by whispers and sidelong glances. All eyes were on the man in the worn jacket, the one who had walked in like he owned nothing yet seemed to command the space with quiet confidence. The receptionist, Emily, straightened her back and adjusted her hair nervously. "Sir, as I mentioned, the staff entrance is on the side," she said again, hoping that repetition would make him go away. She glanced at the gathered guests, half expecting them to intervene, to back her up. Instead, they smiled, amused by the audacity of this poor man daring to approach the front desk. "Oh, look at him trying to check in," whispered a guest in a silk scarf to her companion, eyes rolling. "Does he even know what this place costs per night?" A few nearby guests snickered. A man snapped a quick photo on his phone. The hotel, a 5-star symbol of luxury and exclusivity, had never had someone like him challenge its polished perfection. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't demand attention. And yet, in his silence, he already held it. Ozzy simply waited, calm, composed, letting the murmurs and laughter roll off him like water on stone. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. The paper worn but clearly important. He placed it on the counter without a word. Emily frowned at the envelope. What's this?" she asked, her tone now tinged with confusion. "It's a check," Ozzy said quietly, his voice steady, almost serene. "I'd like to check in, please." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, but her ego and training overrode her caution. "Sir, this front desk is for real guests. Staff entrance is over there." She pointed to a side door that led to the kitchen and maintenance area. Her smile faltered as the guests' laughter grew louder, some whispering about another wannabe, thinking he could belong in a 5-star hotel. One of the bellhops, clearly struggling to contain his amusement, leaned over. "Emily, he doesn't even have the look. Maybe he's lost. But Ozzy's calm gaze never left hers. His expression held a subtle message. Sometimes appearances are more deceiving than anyone can imagine. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He simply waited, silently daring her to misjudge him. Minutes passed. The chatter around him swelled. Phones appeared, cameras recorded, and even the most seasoned staff began to feel the tension in the air. Something about him made people uneasy, though they didn't know why. He didn't belong here, they thought, and yet, he didn't seem like anyone they had ever seen before either. Then, just as Emily opened her mouth to make another dismissive comment, a sound interrupted her, a subtle echo of footsteps across the lobby. A tall man in an immaculate suit appeared near the entrance, flanked by two assistants carrying a briefcase and a folder of documents. Panic flashed in his eyes as he rushed forward. "Sir, we didn't know you were arriving today," he stammered, voice tight, face pale. Ozzy's calm smile remained. The lobby had changed, though no one else had realized it yet. The man who had been laughed at was about to turn the tables, and the power dynamic entirely. The lobby had gone from murmurs to a low hum of tension. Guests were still whispering, some trying to hide their phones while others openly recorded, but now everyone felt it. Something extraordinary was about to happen. Emily, the receptionist, felt her hands sweat as she glanced at the man who had walked in so quietly, Ozzy Osbourne. His calm demeanor, his quiet patience, and the envelope resting on the counter created a contradiction that made her stomach twist. How could someone who looked so ordinary cause the air itself to shift? Then came the footsteps again, louder this time, echoing across the marble floors. A tall, sharply dressed man entered the lobby, followed by two assistants carrying documents and a briefcase. The man's eyes widened as he locked onto Ozzy. "Sir, we didn't know you were arriving today." The man stammered, his voice tight, almost panicked. His hands shook as he reached out, trying to take the envelope from the counter. Guests craned their necks. Some whispered, "Who is that?" Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to continue mocking or step back. The receptionist felt her heart pound. Ozzy finally saw the tall man froze, his eyes darting between Ozzy and the envelope. A realization seemed to strike him all at once, and panic painted his features. "Wait! You! This isn't possible." Emily leaned forward, squinting at the envelope. Something about it shimmered subtly, a weight in both paper and promise. The guests around them leaned in, sensing the moment was shifting. The man in the suit, realizing the front desk receptionist was no longer in charge of the situation, took a step back. Ozzy opened the envelope slightly, enough to reveal the documents inside. The sum, the signatures, the official stamps, all unmistakable. $500,000 in deposits, but not just any deposit. This was a controlling interest in the hotel itself. The whispers turned into gasps. Emily's mouth went dry. She had spent months handling VIP guests, yet none of them had ever made her feel quite like this. Caught between disbelief, fear, and awe. The guests who had been laughing a minute ago now looked uneasy, some frowning, some backing away. The man in the suit dropped to one knee. "Sir, I didn't know. I had no idea." His voice cracked under the weight of embarrassment and sudden understanding. Ozzy didn't speak again. He simply watched, calm and collected, letting the tension build until it became almost unbearable. "Sometimes arrogance blinds people," he said softly, almost to himself. "And sometimes respect is shown only when you think no one is watching." Emily swallowed hard, her own ego bruised but her respect growing. She had been so ready to mock, to dismiss, to enforce a rule blindly, and yet the very man she had judged so harshly held all the power now. The guests had stopped recording. They weren't laughing anymore. Some whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Appearances can deceive, and humility is rare. The man in the suit now scrambled to gather the papers he had dropped, almost tripping over his own feet. "Sir, how did you?" Ozzy finally smiled faintly, a small, knowing curve of the lips. He picked up the envelope, tucked it back into his jacket, and nodded toward the lobby. "I came to check in, and perhaps, to remind everyone of something important." And in that instant, every mocking laugh, every whisper of disdain, and every judgmental glance seemed to evaporate. The lobby had changed. Not physically, but in perception, in awareness, in the understanding that the person you underestimate might one day hold all the power. His voice low and calm, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. I believe you do. The tall man froze, his eyes darting between Ozzy and the envelope. A realization seemed to strike him all at once, and panic painted his features. Wait, this isn't possible. Emily leaned forward, squinting at the envelope. Something about it shimmered subtly, a weight in both paper and promise. The guests around them leaned in, sensing the moment was shifting. The man in the suit, realizing the front desk receptionist was no longer in charge of the situation, took a step back. Ozzy opened the envelope slightly, enough to reveal the documents inside. The sum, the signatures, the official stamps, all unmistakable. $500,000 in deposits, but not just any deposit. This was a controlling interest in the hotel itself. The whispers turned into gasps. Emily's mouth went dry. She had spent months handling VIP guests, yet none of them had ever made her feel quite like this, caught between disbelief, fear, and awe. The guests who had been laughing a minute ago now looked uneasy, some frowning, some backing away. The man in the suit dropped to one knee. Sir, I didn't know. I had no idea. His voice cracked under the weight of embarrassment and sudden understanding. Ozzy didn't speak again. He simply watched, calm and collected, letting the tension build until it became almost unbearable. Sometimes arrogance blinds people, he said softly, almost to himself. And sometimes, respect is shown only when you think no one is watching. Emily swallowed hard, her own ego bruised but her respect growing. She had been so ready to mock, to dismiss, to enforce a rule blindly, and yet the very man she had judged so harshly held all the power now. The guests had stopped recording. They weren't laughing anymore. Some whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Appearances can deceive, and humility is rare. The man in the suit now scrambled to gather the papers he had dropped, almost tripping over his own feet. Sir, how did you? Ozzy finally smiled faintly, a small, knowing curve of the lips. He picked up the envelope, tucked it back into his jacket, and nodded toward the lobby. I came to check in, and perhaps to remind everyone of something important, and in that instant, every mocking laugh, every whisper of disdain, and every judgmental glance seemed to evaporate. The lobby had changed. Not physically, but in perception, in awareness, in the understanding that the person you underestimate might one day hold all the power. Emily took a deep breath, straightening her posture. She wasn't just a receptionist anymore. She was a witness to a lesson many would never forget. Guests slowly resumed their chatter, but it was subdued, careful, respectful. Something had shifted, and everyone in the lobby felt it. The conflict wasn't over, but the first cracks in arrogance and mockery were clear. The man who had been laughed at was about to redefine the rules of power in the Starlight Royale Hotel, and no one, guest or staff, would ever look at appearances the same way again. The lobby of the Starlight Royale Hotel had gone from bustling luxury to an almost surreal scene. Guests froze mid-step, smartphones half raised in the air. The staff, who had moments ago been preoccupied with their routines, now watched with a mix of awe, confusion, and panic. Every eye was on Ozzy Osbourne, the man who had been silently underestimated now, holding the room in an invisible grip of authority. Emily, the receptionist, felt a chill run down her spine. The envelope tucked in Ozzy's jacket wasn't just a check, it was a declaration, a promise. A shift of power so profound that the entire staff felt the weight of it. Her mind raced as she tried to process the reality. This was the man they had all assumed was just some poor guest. And now, he was in control. A bellhop, young and nervous, whispered to a colleague, Do you think he owns the hotel?" The colleague's eyes widened. I don't know. But something tells me, yes." Guests began whispering among themselves. Some shocked, some embarrassed at their earlier laughter. The woman in the designer scarf clutched her phone, as if trying to erase the video she had just recorded. She felt foolish, caught between disbelief and the sudden realization that she had misjudged him. Then the door at the entrance swung open and a sleek black car rolled to a stop. 3 executives in tailored suits stepped out, carrying folders and documents with urgency. Their presence added another layer of tension. Even the hotel's most arrogant guests sensed that this was no ordinary arrival. "Sir, we've been waiting for you," one of them exclaimed, rushing toward Ozzy. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ozzy's calm, quiet demeanor never faltered. He nodded politely, his expression composed. "I came to check in," he said softly. "But it seems there are more important matters to attend to first." The executives fanned out, organizing documents and briefing the staff in hushed, hurried tones. The lobby, which had been a place of mockery just minutes ago, became a stage of tension and awe. Even the most confident guests felt the shift. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by curiosity, respect, and a growing sense of humility. Emily's hands trembled as she adjusted her uniform. She felt simultaneously embarrassed for having judged him and grateful for witnessing such a profound lesson in human character. The staff, previously entertained by what they thought was a harmless scene, now watched their roles with renewed understanding. Some bowed slightly in respect. Others whispered apologies under their breath, realizing they had underestimated the quiet power of patience and humility. Ozzy moved slowly across the lobby, nodding subtly to staff who had remained respectful. His eyes held no malice, only a quiet intelligence, a calm assurance that commands attention without demanding it. The guests who had mocked him avoided eye contact, feeling the sting of their own arrogance. One older clerk who had stayed polite and courteous the entire time caught Ozzy's gaze. He received a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a silent reward for integrity. That single gesture sent a ripple through the lobby, signaling that true respect is recognized, even in subtle ways. By now, the executives had gathered around Ozzy, discussing strategy and logistics. But their urgency did not disturb his composure. The scene in the lobby had become a lesson unfolding in real time. Arrogance is temporary. Humility carries weight, and the power to influence and command respect does not always come from appearance or wealth. Every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance, every suppressed smile of amusement had vanished. The lobby, once a stage for mockery, had transformed into a room charged with awe and contemplation. People realized that the man they had underestimated, the poor guest, was, in reality, the person who held the reins of authority. And in that quiet, almost imperceptible way, he had taught everyone present one of the most important lessons of all: never judge a person by what you see on the surface. The tension in the Starlight Royale lobby had reached a peak that could almost be felt in the air. Guests who had been laughing just minutes ago now stood frozen, their phones lowered, their whispers reduced to stunned murmurs. The staff, who had been unsure how to react to the mysterious man in worn jeans and a leather jacket, now sensed that the moment was about to become unforgettable. Ozzy Osbourne, calm as ever, straightened slightly, his eyes scanning the room with an almost imperceptible satisfaction. He hadn't spoken loudly, hadn't demanded attention, and yet every person in the lobby felt the weight of his presence. The envelope he had placed on the counter was still safely tucked into his jacket, but its significance had become painfully clear. This was no ordinary guest. The 3 executives from outside had gathered around him, their urgency matched only by the awe on their faces. One of them, a tall man with sharp features and nervous hands, stepped forward. "Sir, we've reviewed everything. The transfer is complete. The hotel chain is officially under your ownership," he said, voice almost trembling. Emily's jaw dropped. She felt her knees weaken slightly. The man they had all laughed at, mocked, and dismissed was the owner. Not just any owner, but the majority owner of the entire hotel chain. A murmur ran through the guests. "Wait, he owns this hotel?" whispered a woman, clutching her designer bag to her chest as if it might protect her from embarrassment. Another guest muttered, "That's Ozzy Osbourne, the rock star." Ozzy's calm voice finally carried across the lobby, steady and deliberate. "I came here today to check in, but now I realize I'm here to make a change." His gaze swept the room, lingering on faces that had shown disrespect. Respect isn't something you show to wealth. It's something you show to people, especially those you think can't affect your life. Emily could barely breathe. She had been so ready to enforce rules, to dismiss him. And now she understood the full lesson. Appearances can be deceiving, arrogance can blind, and humility carries more weight than wealth. One of the younger bellhops who had openly smirked at Ozzy earlier swallowed nervously and muttered, I never expected. His sentence trailed off as he realized words were useless against the revelation unfolding before him. Ozzy turned to the receptionist, Emily, the only staff member who had remained respectful. From this moment on, I want integrity and humility rewarded, he said quietly, and those who disrespect others, well, consequences follow. The executives began coordinating quietly, and the staff felt the shift immediately. Some employees who had acted arrogantly now found themselves reassigned. Others, like Emily, received recognition for their professionalism and patience. One staff member who had openly mocked him lost their position, replaced by someone who had quietly performed their duties with respect and dignity. Guests, too, were affected. Those who had laughed now offered awkward apologies, some in whispers, some directly. The lobby had transformed from a place of mockery to a hall of reflection. People realized that the man they had underestimated was the one wielding real power. Not through loud words, flashy attire, or aggressive displays, but through calm authority, intelligence, and patience. Ozzy Osbourne finally turned to leave. He didn't make a scene, he didn't gloat. He walked toward the exit with the same quiet confidence he had entered with, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and humbled staff. His presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder that respect is earned. Arrogance is temporary, and appearances are often the least reliable measure of a person's true influence. The doors closed behind him, and the lobby erupted. Not with laughter, but with whispers of awe. Every person in that space had learned the same lesson. Never underestimate anyone. Never mock quietly. And never assume power belongs only to those who appear wealthy or important. The lobby of the Starlight Royale Hotel was still buzzing, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. Where there had been mockery and arrogance, there was now a quiet respect. The staff moved with renewed focus, knowing that the hotel was no longer just a workplace. It was a place where integrity, patience, and humility were recognized and rewarded. Emily, the receptionist, stood behind the front desk, still in disbelief. She had watched the entire scene unfold, from the moment Ozzy Osbourne had walked in, to the panic of the executives, to the final revelation of his ownership. Her heart was pounding, but a sense of pride filled her. She had treated him with respect even when others mocked him. And now that had been acknowledged. The tall executive who had initially panicked at Ozzy's arrival approached her cautiously. Miss, I think you handled everything perfectly calm, professional. You didn't let the chaos affect you. That's exactly the kind of person we want leading the front desk going forward. Emily blinked, overwhelmed. Me? Are you serious? Yes, he said with a nod. From today, you're the face of this lobby. Your integrity and composure have set the standard for everyone here. Consider it a promotion. Nearby, the bellhops and other staff began to whisper among themselves. Some exchanged nervous glances, realizing that their earlier behavior, mocking Ozzy, laughing at someone they assumed was poor, was not only embarrassing, but now had consequences. One junior staff member who had openly sneered at Ozzy was quietly reassigned to back office duties, while another, who had remained polite and attentive, was given more responsibilities and recognition. Guests, too, were affected. The woman in the designer scarf approached Emily looking sheepish. I just wanted to say sorry, she said softly. I didn't realize I shouldn't have judged. Emily smiled politely. It's all right. Everyone learns at some point. The executives continued their work, coordinating with staff and updating systems to reflect the new ownership. The black car that had brought them remained parked outside, ready to escort Ozzy when his business there was done. But even as preparations were made, the energy in the lobby had shifted completely. No one dared mock anyone else. The lesson had been learned in real time. Meanwhile, Ozzy Osbourne himself had returned briefly to the front desk. Not to boast, but to acknowledge those who had acted with integrity. He gave Emily a small nod, a silent thank you for her calm professionalism. Then, without fanfare, he turned and walked toward the exit once more. As he passed the stunned guests, the lessons of the day hung in the air. Respect is not about wealth, status, or appearances. True power is quiet, patient, and observant. Those who underestimate others often do so at their own peril. The hotel had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of Ozzy's entrance, the envelope, and the quiet yet devastating reveal lingered. Staff and guests alike would talk about this day for months, even years. It wasn't just about a rock star owning a luxury hotel. It was about the lesson he left behind. Humility, patience, and respect matter, far more than arrogance or wealth. As the executives left, Emily leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. She knew that from this day forward, the Starlight Royale Hotel would be a very different place. One where true character, not appearances, determined who was recognized, promoted, or respected. And though Ozzy was gone, the impact of his presence remained, echoing through the marble halls like a quiet, unforgettable lesson. The Starlight Royale Hotel returned to its usual rhythm after the whirlwind of events that morning, but nothing felt the same. The chandeliers still sparkled, the marble floors still gleamed, and the faint scent of fresh flowers still lingered in the air. But the energy in the lobby was forever changed. The staff moved with a newfound respect, not just for their guests but for each other. The guests themselves carried a quiet humility, knowing they had been caught in a moment of judgment they would never forget. Emily, now officially recognized as the face of the front desk, reflected on the morning's events. She had seen arrogance, mockery, and disbelief. She had watched guests and staff alike assume that appearances dictated ability, worth, and authority. And yet, in walked a man who looked ordinary, unassuming, even poor to the untrained eye, and completely rewrote the rules. Ozzy Osbourne had entered the hotel silently, calmly, and with no need for fanfare, but his actions had left a mark far greater than any show of wealth or status could. The moral of the story, Emily realized, was simple but powerful. Respect is not earned by appearance, wealth, or status. It is earned by how you treat others, especially when you believe no one is watching. True power doesn't demand attention. It commands it quietly. True influence is measured not by arrogance or noise, but by patience, humility, and the ability to recognize the value of people, even when the world overlooks them. Guests who had mocked Ozzy now found themselves humbled. Some approached the staff offering apologies, while others whispered quietly among themselves about how quickly assumptions can lead to embarrassment and regret. Even the staff who had shown arrogance learned a lesson they would never forget. The person you underestimate today could be the one reshaping your life tomorrow. Outside, the black car that had brought the executives and Ozzy himself waited quietly. No cameras, no fanfare, just efficiency, calm, and quiet authority. It was a fitting symbol for the man who had just transformed the hotel lobby into a living lesson about humility and respect. Those who observed him in that moment understood something essential. Appearances are fleeting, judgment is dangerous, and kindness is timeless. Emily looked around the lobby one last time before resuming her duties. She thought of the bellhops, the clerks, the guests, every single person who had witnessed the scene. Each of them had been part of a story that was bigger than a hotel check, and they had been part of a story about character, about perception, about how silently powerful respect can be. And then she smiled. She understood the quiet truth Ozzy had demonstrated. Life has a way of turning tables on those who underestimate others. Arrogance fades, humility lasts. Laughter at someone else's expense may seem harmless, but one day, it might be met with the quiet strength of someone you never thought could influence your world. So, as the lobby settled into its new rhythm, Emily typed a quick note on her computer, pausing to look out at the polished marble floors one more time. Respect isn't about wealth, it isn't about power, it isn't about who you think deserves it. Respect is about seeing the value in everyone, every day, even when it goes unnoticed. Because one day, the person you overlooked might be the one who changes everything. And with that, the story of the man in the worn jacket, the quiet power behind the envelope, the humble hero, the owner no one expected, remained etched into every mind in that hotel. A story that would be retold, shared, and remembered, long after the luxury faded, long after the laughter subsided, and long after the lobby returned to its polished, pristine normalcy. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is the greatest strength, and share where you're watching from. I want to thank everyone who honors kindness and integrity in a world that sometimes forgets them.